Welcome to the latest episode of the Teaming Up podcast. In this episode, Sean Ryan is joined by Ryan Nobles, a Capitol Hill correspondent for NBC News. Ahead of the 2024 election, this conversation centers around Ryan Nobles' career arc and how he went from our local NBC Richmond affiliate to CNN and ultimately to NBC. They talk about the evolution of political reporting and the challenges posed by misinformation, and the ambition and drive needed to adapt to a fast-paced media landscape. If you haven't yet, make sure you're subscribed to Teaming Up and leave us a review if you like what you're hearing. Now, Sean, take it away.
Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you, Sean. Always love talking to my friends in Central Virginia, and a lot of great memories from living in Richmond, so I'm thrilled to be on with you.
Well, we got to know each other when you were here in Richmond at the NBC affiliate, and could you walk us through kind of your career and every place that you stopped before arriving at NBC?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times when I look back on my career and I wonder, how did I get here? Like that old Talking Heads song. How did my life get to this point? I grew up south of Buffalo in a very small town in Chautauqua County. We had one stoplight, and I graduated high school with 87 kids. Didn't know anybody in media or television, but always had this dream of wanting to be a broadcaster. My dream as a young man was to be a sportscaster, and just decided to focus all my energy on that, and went to college at Brockport, which is a SUNY school, which is the State University of New York system in New York, and just dove into it from that point. Worked at the college radio station, did play-by-play for the football team, and interned at the NBC affiliate in Rochester. And then that led to a TV job at the Fox station in Rochester. And then my first real big TV job was in Utica, New York, which, we rank television markets by size, one being the biggest, which is New York City, and, 400 something being the smallest. And Utica was market 169 when I first broke into the business. And I started out as a sportscaster there and did that for 2 years. And then my boss at the time asked me if I'd ever considered doing news, and it was the right time for me to consider that. Local sports broadcasting in particular was changing quite a bit, and I'd always kind of considered myself a broadcaster first and a sportscaster second, so moved over to do the news. And actually my second day reporting the news was September 11th, 2001. And we had just launched a brand new newscast at WKTV in Utica, and found ourselves caught up in the aftermath of September 11th and the terrorist attacks there. And, I'm not here to tell you that I have some sort of firsthand experience there, because obviously I've worked with a lot of colleagues that were in the mix at ground zero and everything. But I was, it gave me kind of a quick crash course in news reporting. I was in Utica. I did that for about another year and a half or so. I actually had a very brief time where I quit my TV job in Utica and ran for the state assembly as an independent candidate when I was 26 years old. I lost that race, and then kind of did a bit of soul searching, and decided to go back to graduate school at the University of Albany to get my master's in public administration. And after I'd gotten accepted to the master's program at Albany, I was offered the morning anchor job at the ABC station in Albany, New York. And that was a great experience, because I was anchoring the morning show. I was covering their state legislature during the day, and then was going to graduate school at night to learn the business of government. And I was a full-time student at the time and a full-time journalist. And after I got my master's degree, which is a 2-year program, I had connections with leaders back in Utica, and the county executive there asked me if I wanted to put the master's degree to work. So I went back to Utica, got married. My wife and I were actually co-anchors at the station in Utica. We'd moved to Albany together, and then we moved back to Utica, which we kind of thought was going to be our home forever. And I decided I was going to set about working in government. And I was the county youth bureau director in Oneida County for about a year. And then the county executive I was working for ran for the state Senate. I worked on his Senate campaign. He was elected to the Senate. And then I was working in the New York State Senate. And my wife and I were kind of in a period where we didn't know what we wanted to do with the rest of our lives. We were struggling with infertility at the time. We were newly married. And I got a call from a headhunter out of the blue. I'd been out of television for 2 years. And I got a call from a headhunter out of the blue that said, would you ever consider getting back into television? And there's a job in Richmond, Virginia. And I didn't really know anything about Richmond, Virginia. It was a place we drove by on the way to Myrtle Beach for our spring break vacations. I did have two colleagues, Matt DiNardo, who's still at Channel 8 in Richmond, and Andy Jenks, who I worked with at Channel 12 and now works in school communications in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, who had already lived in Richmond, were there ahead of me. All three of us had worked at the same station in Utica, and both of them spoke highly about the city and the town, and Andy spoke highly of the TV station that was recruiting me. And so I flew down with zero expectations, and basically from my first day there, fell in love with the town. And they offered me the weekend anchor job, and I was off to the races. That was 2007. We really kind of like flipped our lives upside down, but in very positive ways. I started out as a weekend anchor, and I got there in 2007, which was such an amazing time to be there as a political reporter, which is really kind of where my career was headed. And that's because, Virginia became a swing state in 2008. And I covered the 2008 and 2012 elections from this perch as a swing state reporter, which gave, the campaigns gave us unbelievable access. Richmond in particular was such an important market for Barack Obama and John McCain and then Mitt Romney. So I interviewed Barack Obama 3 times for WKT or for WWBT. One of the times actually in the White House. And throughout that period of time, I started this political blog called DecisionVirginia.com, where I would take all this political reporting that I had, and only a very small amount of it would physically get on television. But I would take these long interviews that I do with these decision makers, Ken Cuccinelli, Terry McAuliffe, Bob McDonnell, Tim Kaine, Mark Warner, and we put the whole interviews on DecisionVirginia.com. And that got me a lot of national attention. Because, obviously there was a very specific local connection that I was making with these interviews that our viewers cared about. But then I would get these, more broad national questions that a national audience cared about. And my stuff started getting picked up by Politico and CNN and these different, because the digital kind of political news space was really just starting to grow at that time. And then in 2014, I was in a contract at the end of my contract with Richmond, and my wife and I were like trying to figure out what the next step of our lives was going to be. And we were really at that point where I hadn't quite turned 40 yet. It was like, are we going to settle in Richmond for the rest of our lives, or are we going to go for the big shot? And we loved Richmond. There are days where I often wonder like what our lives would have been like there. And I look at it fondly. But my wife was the kind of the driver, like, you're going to wonder the rest of your life, like what could have been if you don't go for this. And so I hired an agent, which was the first time I'd ever done that in my career, and just kind of threw my hat out there and said, is anybody looking for a political reporter at the national level? And that's when CNN came calling. But it was like, I was like a day away from re-signing in Richmond before the CNN job actually came through. And so I went to CNN, covered the 2016 campaign for them for local stations. CNN has a division where they provide content for local stations. And then 2017, I covered the Trump White House, covered Capitol Hill. 2018, covered the midterm elections in Florida, including a recount, which went 17 days. I covered the Virginia blackface scandal with Ralph Northam for CNN. And then 2019, I was through the 2020 election, I was on the Bernie Sanders campaign. So I followed Bernie Sanders across the country for a year and a half. Then COVID hit, was home for a little while. The Sanders campaign ended. And then I was on the Trump campaign, covered the Trump campaign through the balance of the general election, and then covered the runoff in Georgia. And when I was covering the runoff in Georgia is when CNN told me that they wanted me to become a full-time Capitol Hill reporter, which was kind of a long-term dream of mine. And so I was all set to cover Capitol Hill. I was going to start on Capitol Hill right after the inauguration in 2020, and I was covering the runoff in Georgia on which was January 5th, and then January 6th happened, where I was in a hotel room in Atlanta and watched that whole thing play out. I flew home the following day, and my boss called me and said, "Get to the Capitol as quickly as you can." So my first day as a Capitol Hill reporter, full-time Capitol Hill reporter, was January 7th of 2021. And I've been on Capitol Hill since, covered the January 6th Select Committee for CNN, and then made the transition from CNN to NBC in 2022, and have just had such an amazing time with NBC and this team. Been very fortunate. I get to be on the Today Show and Nightly News, these shows that I watched as a little kid when I dreamed of being a broadcaster. This is what the dream was about. And so it's been a whirlwind. You know, there's all these whys in the road. Like, if I'd gone this way, what would have happened? What if I'd gone that way? What would have happened? But here's where we are, and I feel very fortunate to end up here.
Well, Ryan, you said that you dreamed about it, but you know, dreams are dreams, and you somehow made it a reality. When you're starting in Utica, New York, could you have envisioned, you know, doing the things that you're doing today?
I often stop myself all the time and think, you know, I don't know how I got here. You know, it's all almost kind of a whirlwind. I think I've always been very ambitious, and I've always wanted that next challenge. But I think what I've really benefited from, I kind of view my career as a slow burn. I have a lot of colleagues who are incredibly talented, who got right to the top in their late 20s and early 30s. I'm now approaching 50. I just turned 48. And, you know, I think one of the things I've really appreciated about my career is that every time I've gotten to that next stage, I've thought I made it. You know, like when I got the full-time TV job in Utica, that's all I ever wanted. I just wanted to be a full-time television broadcaster. And if I'd gotten that job in Utica and stayed in Utica for the rest of my life, I think I would have considered myself a success. And I felt the same way in Albany. I felt the same way in Richmond. And so I almost feel like I'm playing with house money from the very beginning, because when I was a kid growing up in south of Buffalo, the idea that I could just be on TV in Buffalo would have been like, wow, how could you ever imagine that? So it's kind of a nice thing that I'm at now, because I feel like I've made it, but I still feel, encouraged and excited to go even further. So it's a whirlwind, and I definitely have to pinch myself sometimes.
And you kind of always knew that you wanted to be a journalist. You said that a couple times already, that, growing up, you thought, hey, I want to be on TV.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, when I counsel people that are coming up in the business, I think that's one of the greatest benefits that I had. And I have a freshman in high school now. My oldest is a freshman. I'm an 8th grader. And I'm starting to talk to them about that right now. Is I knew at their age that this is what I wanted to do for a living. And I think I'm very fortunate. Not everybody knows that right away. And so that gave me the opportunity, even in high school. I did the morning announcements. There was a local radio station that had kids come on weekends and read highlights of what was happening in their high school. Any opportunity I had to expose myself to the business and learn about it, I was able to take advantage of. From the second I got on campus at Brockport, I did that. So it helps to know, to at least have an idea of what it is that you want to do, because you can start attacking that right away. And not everybody has that benefit. So I feel very fortunate in that regard, especially in a business like this, which is so competitive, and you got to get out. You need that kind of head start. I was really lucky to know that's what I wanted to do. And then when I actually started doing it, it was everything I dreamed it would be. Because I think that also happens to people too, right? They think they want to do something, then they start doing it, and it's not what they thought it would be. So yeah, in that regard, I think I'm very fortunate.
Well, when you start out, also, you're oftentimes, I'm assuming, a one-man band. You're out there being a sports anchor. You're out there holding a camera on the Friday night sidelines for high school football, doing that kind of stuff. How much did that help position you for each of your subsequent stops, and how much does all that legwork and paying your dues help you doing what you're doing today?
It's such a great question, and it's absolutely true. I don't think there's any aspect of the business that I don't have some understanding of. I wouldn't call myself an expert. I know how to edit. I know how to shoot. I know how to do all those things. There's people that do it much better than me. But if I'm in a pinch and we need to do it, and we're at the stage now where the technology has equalized so much that you never know when you're in a position, you're all by yourself somewhere and you see a lawmaker or a newsmaker walk by and all you've got is your iPhone. You got to be able to shoot that on your iPhone in a way that can be used on television now. And, the skills that I picked up at Brockport, the skills that I had in Utica are skills that I lean on every single day. It's also kind of an understanding of, what our teams need when we go out and do a shoot, how that's going to look and how we best position ourselves to tell that story. And also kind of an understanding of what my colleagues do and how important their work is toward our team effort. And, when you're 100% right, when I worked in Utica, you had to do everything. You had to write, edit, shoot. You had to go find the stories, all those things. And I think I really benefit from that even at this level, because you never know when you're in a position where, you just got to, pick up your bootstraps and be a part of any aspect of the news gathering operation. And so, it benefits me in two ways. One, I understand that aspect of it, but two, it makes me appreciate the people I work with every day.
You mentioned getting a chance to cover elections when you were here in Richmond working for the NBC affiliate here. What do you remember from those experiences?
Well, I think the thing that I appreciated the most during that period of time was that, especially in the 2008 election, Virginians weren't accustomed to getting so much attention in a presidential election. It'd been 40 years since a candidate other than a Republican had won the presidential race in Virginia. And Virginia, statewide had gone back and forth. Republicans and Democrats had gotten elected, but it was basically a red state from a presidential perspective. And then all of the sudden, and I think, Barack Obama was really the one who said, I think I can win there. And it was such an honor for me because I kind of felt, especially because I hadn't lived in Virginia, I think that gave me kind of an outsider's perspective on it at that time. I saw this kind of wave coming of interest in Virginia as a swing state. And so that was like something that I really impressed upon my leaders in our newsroom about how we need to make this a thing. We gotta own this reporting line because we're going to wake up and all of a sudden Virginia is going to be the center of activity. And that's exactly what it turned out to be. I distinctly remember they used to call it the Jefferson-Jackson dinner. They call it something different now, but there was a Jefferson-Jackson dinner, which was the big Democratic fundraiser in Virginia in the spring of 2007 before the race had really kicked off. And Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both headlined that event. And I remember telling our bosses, we've got to cover this because this is, to have both of these people here, it demonstrates how much they care about Virginia. And then, I think we made a concerted effort to get in every room. We want to make sure that we're asking these candidates questions that our viewers specifically care about. In many ways, there's good and bad about the Electoral College, and we're not debating that today. But the one thing the Electoral College does is it forces places where candidates care. It almost becomes a local election. And it gave us incredible opportunities at that time to force these candidates to answer very specific questions about how Virginia was going to be treated by these candidates if they were elected. And that was, more than anything, it was an honor. And, to be kind of known of during that period of time as somebody who was like leading the charge of that coverage was something I'll never forget.
What do you like most about covering elections?
Well, I think I love the pace of it, right? I love that it's kind of a slow build. And then it gets really intense, and then you're moving toward this final day of counting, and then there's kind of a nice, denouement afterwards where you kind of soak it all in and you look back, and then you're able to take a break. It's like, I love the idea of just running as hard as you can through the finish line, knowing that there's a finish line at the end where you can sit back and reflect, and then you get some time, and then it builds again. I love the idea of kind of being the voice in the room for the average voter. I always think every time I get an opportunity to be in front of an elected leader or candidate, like what are the people that are watching me? What do they want to ask this guy? Why is this important to them? I think it's, there's so much about it that impacts the daily lives of everyday Americans. And to be able to be the person that has kind of a front row seat to those conversations, it's just the most incredible part of the job, I think.
How about a least favorite part?
Well, I think my least favorite part about the job and covering campaigns and politics in particular now is just that the flood of misinformation has made it really difficult to, I pride myself on being a objective, middle of the road journalist. I do not support a candidate or a cause. I am somebody that's here trying to fight through all the rhetoric from both sides to provide my viewer with the most accurate assessment of what's happening. And I remember starting a Twitter account in Richmond in 2008. I remember being really excited about getting to my 100th follower for Barack Obama's inauguration. And, at that time it was so, it was such a burgeoning medium. And to see what it's become in such a short period of time is both encouraging and discouraging. It's encouraging because it's given a lot of people a voice and it's given them a seat at the table, and it's allowed people the opportunity to get more information than they could have ever hoped for. But the downside of it is that there is so much disinformation flooding the zone, and the fact that everyone can contribute to it makes it a lot harder for those of us that are just trying to get the accurate information out there. And I think the thing that's most discouraging about it is that we're seeing campaigns and candidates and parties utilize that disinformation as a way to confuse voters and undermine us as an institution who are just trying to get it right.
That kind of leads into the next question, is that almost any soundbite or campaign stop can make news, but how do you decide, and how does NBC decide what actually gets covered and what gets reported?
Yeah, so there's a balancing act, right? The first thing I'll say is we are covering more than we have ever covered in the history of NBC News as an organization. And that's because we have so many platforms to disseminate that news, right? We have our main network, which is the Today Show and nightly news, but we also have our streaming channel, NBC News Now, which is growing rapidly and is on the air almost 24 hours a day with new live content, some of which airs on local stations as well. And then we also have our cable outlet, MSNBC, and then we have NBCnews.com, which is also growing like crazy. So we don't have to be as discerning about the stories that we choose. When I was first watching NBC Nightly News as a young man, they had 22 minutes basically to tell the story of the entire world. We still do that every night. And if you got away from watching NBC Nightly News every night because our viewing patterns have changed, I encourage you to check it out again because what's crazy about the internet age is that you'd think it would open the world to everyone, right? Like they would have so much information, they'd be learning about every single thing. But what it's done is, because it's on demand, we can kind of pick and choose and only read and watch the things that we care about. And so I think what's nice about nightly news is like you at 22 minutes are going to get a really good sense of everything happening in the world. I kind of went off on a tangent from answering your original question, but the point is that we can do a lot, and we try not to let anything that is newsworthy or noteworthy fall through the cracks. And maybe not all of it's going to get on nightly news or the Today Show, but there's going to be a space for it on nightlynews.com, and there's our NBCnews.com or on NBC News Now. So, we can get as much out there as we possibly can, but there are still these judgment calls that got to be made about what is the most important thing, what our viewers are going to be most interested in, and, is there a way for us to tell it in a compelling, interesting way? And all those things go into the conversation when we decide to pursue a story. Some of them are obvious, right? They're big, right? Oh, the government's going to shut down. Obviously, we've got to cover it. But sometimes they're smaller and underneath the radar. We're working on a story that is going to run on nightly news at some point about how the eagle is not the national bird. You've lived your whole life thinking that the eagle is the national bird. My son had a test this week. My 7-year-old in second grade had a test. He had to answer that the eagle is the national symbol. Turns out it's not. We met a guy in Minnesota that's working to change that. The Senate has passed the law to do that. And so those are kind of the under the radar stories that we're sometimes focusing on too.
And what is the national bird, the true national bird?
There is no national bird. I blew your mind right now, Sean. There is no national bird, but they're going to change it. The Senate's already passed a resolution. The House is probably going to pass it soon. So, but we met this an amazing character in Minnesota who has collected over 40,000 eagle artifacts over the course of his life. And it was through this kind of obsession with the eagle that he was doing research for a book where he discovered, he just wanted to kind of make note of it. It became the official symbol or official bird on this date. And he realized that it had never been officially named the national bird. It's on the national seal. It's on all kinds of American iconography, but the actual title of official bird has never been granted to the eagle. But that's hopefully going to change.
So relationships in our business matter a lot. How do you start to make those relationships when you're starting to walk the halls of the Capitol, and how important are they when you're trying to cover, just day in and day out news or elections?
Yeah, covering Capitol Hill in particular, the relationships are the most important aspect of it. But it's a delicate balance, right? I'm not up here to be friends with anyone. For instance, Mark Warner's a good example. I've known Mark Warner for, going on 15 years. I've, covered him from literally my first day in Richmond, and I see him up here on a regular basis. I just saw him. I was in Manassas covering early voting, and we talked then. And he and I have a friendly relationship, but I would never describe him as a friend, right? Because you try and keep that divide of, I'm covering you as a politician and a candidate and somebody that has to do work on behalf of the people of Virginia and America. And so what you want to create is a level of respect between you and the people that you cover. Part of that is just the body of work, right? Someone knows when they sit with an interview with me that they're going to get a fair shake, that the story I tell is going to be accurate, and that it may not necessarily be everything they want it to be, but they know that it's going to be it's going to be fair. And then the second part of it is just longevity, just time, right? Warner and Tim Kaine's another good example. These are people I've just known for a long time. Bobby Scott, I've just known these people for a long time. And so you get a level of familiarity with them. And that's one of the benefits of being on Capitol Hill for a long time. I've been here full time now for almost 4 years, but prior to that, I was covering it on and off as early as 2017. So I've been around all these people. I've been around the people that work on the staffs and the people that support the principals. And so those relationships, and it's a relationship built on trust, that they know that I'm someone of integrity that's going to cover them fairly. It doesn't mean I'm going to get every scoop, because I'm not there. If it's not perfect, we're going to point that out. Your tax plan doesn't work because it's going to create this much of a hole in the deficit. I'm going to tell that part of it too. But in general, it means I'm going to get the access I need to tell the story that needs to be told.
When you first started, though, how intimidating is it? Because to me, as a former journalist, I think that's one of the most intimidating careers out there, or beats out there, so to speak, is that you're there to report the news, but you're also competing with every other reporter in just such a dynamic environment. So how intimidating was it when you first started the beat?
Yeah, it was pretty intimidating. I do think that I got a good crash course in it in Richmond. First of all, I covered state legislatures, right? I covered the Albany, I covered the New York State Legislature, and I covered the State House in Virginia. And so you get kind of these little incubators of government that kind of teach you. It's it's like being at the AAA level and learning from that perspective before getting to the major league. So I already kind of had a sense of the flow of the legislature, how the legislature works and everything like that. And then I've been around pretty important people already. So I'd lost that kind of aura of, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm interviewing this United States Senator. By the time I got to Capitol Hill full time, that part of it had already passed. And then it's just a matter of time, right? You're around this enough where you learn that they're just people too. There isn't something special about them. As my grandfather used to say, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. And you always kind of go into every situation with a bit of that skepticism. And so that's how you get over that pretty quickly. And once you start doing that, then it's just about collecting the information and getting the job done. And Sean, I do have to go here in the next minute or so.
Yeah, this is great. And Ryan, let's just go ahead and wrap. I'll give you one quick question to maybe wrap up on.
Okay.
Any favorite interviews? Do you have a favorite interview over the last 20 years of doing this or longer? Any favorite interviews, one or two of them that you look back on?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to top interviewing the President of the United States in the White House. That was a pretty unbelievable and surreal experience. And probably the most intimidating part about that was not being overwhelmed by the moment. And I just remember prepping like crazy for that. I wanted to go in there and ask him tough questions. I didn't want it to be a softball interview. I was really proud of that. That interview won an Emmy Award, a local Emmy Award. And, that was pretty amazing. But, I also, when I worked in Utica, as obviously I'm a sports fanatic, and when I worked in Utica, the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown was in our market. And we got access to just like these crazy Hall of Famers. Like it seemed like once a week I was interviewing Johnny Bench, and I interviewed Ernie Banks and Robin Yount and Nolan Ryan. And I think at that time I didn't really appreciate how cool that was, because it was just like, it just happened. It's like the guy I worked with was like, hey, Ernie Banks is going to be at this thing, go over and interview him. And that, I think, looking back on it now, was one of the most exciting and fun experiences that I ever had as a reporter. I remember Ernie Banks gave me his card and told me to call him anytime. I never took advantage of that, but that was a pretty surreal experience.
Well, Ryan, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And it's been great to watch your career after Richmond and seeing you at CNN and now NBC. We're really grateful again, and best of luck to you over these next 40-plus days.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Sean. And I always miss everybody in Richmond. Please say hello to everybody for me. We get back there often. And it was a great period of my life. And so it's always great to reminisce about that. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Teaming Up podcast. Teaming Up is brought to you by the Hodges Partnership, a strategic communications agency that specializes in storytelling through public relations, media relations, content marketing, and social media. The Teaming Up podcast is a Happy Committee production. Episodes are released monthly. Subscribe on your favorite podcast service so you never miss an episode.